Tom was out on the mere, Ellemere, and he was fishing. And it was one of those perfect nights to be out fishing. The mere was calm, the air was still, and it was cold, but there was no bite to it, and as he looked up the sky was clear and the stars shone down. And Tom, he lay back in his boat, head resting on his hands, and enjoyed the gentle rock of the water, the wind just rustling through the reeds. And as he looked up, the moon was full and fat and heavy in the sky, and she lit up the mere like a mirror, and the branches of the trees framing Ellemere were silhouetted black against the velvet sky. And Tom lay there, enjoying the peace, enjoying the quiet, watching the moon slowly sinking in the sky. But she was so full and fat and heavy that she seemed to be sinking even faster than usual, and soon she would dip down below the horizon, and it wouldn't be long until morning. And Tom knew that he would have to sit up, pull his nets in, and make his way home before the morning came. So he eased himself up in the boat, and he took hold of his net and he started pulling it out of the water, and it was full, it was heavy, and he put his back into it, pulling hard. He pulled that net up out of the water streaming from the net as he pulled it up, and he pulled it over the side of the boat, and there it was, the bottom of the boat, but there was no fish in it. It was full, but it was full of something white, something gleaming, and as he looked, he saw that there were white limbs, 2 white arms folding around 2 legs, and then there was a face. The face of a girl peeping up over those knees, looking up at Tom. And Tom, he looked down at her. And it was a girl. But it wasn't a girl. Not a girl like any he had ever seen. Her skin was milk white, and her eyes were big, dark and liquid. She had long hair that streamed down her back and over her shoulders, and it was green, like riverweed. She stared up at him, he stared down at her, and then he remembered. He remembered the stories that he had heard as a lad from the old boys down at the pub, the stories of the Asrai, and he'd never believed them. But here one was, an Asrai, one of the people who lived beneath the mere, only coming up once every 100 years to bathe in the light of the full moon and to grow. And then Tom realised that she was speaking. And it wasn't a language like any that he'd heard. Her voice was liquid and melodious. It sounded like summer rain falling on still water. But it was full of the longing of a salmon on its way home. And though Tom didn't know the words, he knew the meaning. And without thinking, he bent down, he started to undo the knots of the net to set her free. But then he started thinking. Nobody he knew had ever seen an Asrai before. Many people hadn't even heard of them, and here he had one, caught in his net. And he thought about his family, he thought about his children, he thought about putting food on the table, of putting shoes on his children's feet. And he hardened his heart, because the people up at the big house, they would pay well for an Asrai to swim in their fish ponds, to play with the swans. And so he retied those knots, and he took the oars into his hands. But she sat up in the boat. She reached out to him, holding out one of those thin arms, and she took hold of his elbow. And for a moment it was like cool silk stroking his arm. But then, almost as if she was burnt by his human warmth, she took her hand away and she huddled in the end of the boat. And Tom, he reached over the side of the boat and he pulled up some of the rushes, and he put them over her to keep her moist, to keep her wet, in case that her skin would dry out. And he started to row to the far side of the mere. And as he rowed over the mere, trying to ignore the Asrai, trying to ignore that language that was coming, that pleading, the moon dipped down beneath the horizon, and the first glimmers of sunlight came from the east. When he made his way to the bank, and he stepped out, splashing in the water. He took hold of the end of the boat, and he pulled it up onto the dry land. And he bent down in the boat, and he moved the rushes out of the way to lift up the Asrai, to take her into the house, to show her to his wife and to his children. But when he moved those rushes away, and as the sunlight hit his boat, he saw that there was nothing beneath those rushes but a pool of water. And Tom had nothing to show for his night's fishing, except the story. And his arm. His arm, for the rest of his life, in his elbow, there was always a feeling of cold. He never warmed it up again in his life, and when the moonlight touched his skin, once again it would ache and throb, and he would remember the night that he saw the Asrai.